There may be no more divisive, maybe toxic, overpowered, or underrated legend in all of Apex Legends than this totem-pushing, higher-climbing Revenant. It's been about 2 years since his Season 4 inception, and as of late, Revenant's pick rate and popularity have both been on a pretty steady decline since his Season 9 buff. Today, we're going to ask the question of what happened to Revenant. Is he actually toxic? And is he still any good or viable in the meta of Apex Legends? When Revenant first launched, he had one of the most insane launch trailers and extreme amounts of hype behind him, but it was quickly realized that Revenant was a pretty poor legend who wasn't really viable, and this was typical with most of the legends up to Season 7. His totem had limited range, and while you would respawn at it, you would only respawn at that totem with 1 health, making it a pretty risky proposition to even use it. Revenant did quickly see some buffs, but it was not really till Octane's major buff to the pad a few seasons later when Revenant's popularity skyrocketed. It was this Revtane combo of this ultimate and pad that would give players a pretty satisfying but brokenly good and maybe a little toxic way to push onto enemy teams to get some free kills with little to no risk at all. Fast forward to the middle of Season 9, and Revenant gets a massive buff of higher climbing to his passive ability, which honestly makes him a super solid movement legend. But ever since that buff, Revenant's decline has been steady until Season 10, when it more or less dropped off completely. At the start of Season 10, Revenant had a fairly large nerf to the ultimate, where players now have a massive, and I mean massive, audible and visual cue that Revenant's totem has been activated. This means the toxicity of third partying has more or less been hugely nerfed, as players can now appropriately prepare for it. Which honestly, it's a good thing, and it's a solid change to Revenant's ultimate. So now Revenant has that audible and visual indication, but regardless of this, the totem still acts the same as it did before, with a slight timer reduction of 5 seconds. But this is really not why Revenant is no longer picked. It's the combination of a lot of different factors to a steady decline. For one, Apex players are getting better. Players now better know how to stop that Revtane push, and players being notified that the team is coming is a greatly appreciated counter. In addition to this, Octane's pick rate has plummeted in half or so due to what feels like a half-dozen nerfs. So in reality, Revenant's decline is not singular in nature, but rather a mix of factors from nerfs to him and his companion Legend Octane, and the introduction to new legends. But is Revenant really that toxic? Was he toxic? I mean, he's in the game, and Respawn could adjust this legend to be whatever they want him to be. If we look at Season 8 Revtane, where you could pad onto enemy teams during ranked with little or no negative outcomes, this was absolutely a toxic and unhealthy way for the game to be. But since that Season 10 nerf, Revenant's actually been a pretty balanced legend in the grand scheme of things. For the most part, in any game, what is meta will be the highest and most picked item or characters in the game, as players want the biggest advantage they can possibly have. However, for Revenant, if we ask the question of is he underpowered or overpowered, the pick rate analysis would say he is underpowered. It kind of comes down to his kit of abilities. For the most part, his abilities are pretty self-centered and provide little to no utility for the squad. This means in a high-intense scenario like upper ranked, his worthiness is little to none, and the pick rate definitely shows it. On a casual level though, he is still underutilized compared to the majority of other legends, but not every legend can be highly picked. At the moment, Revenant is definitely not a overpowered legend, but I do think he's a little underrated and absolutely underutilized. The main issue with Revenant is again going to be that previously mentioned usefulness for the squad. Because he is relatively solo-centered, and his totem requires a lot of coordination to be fully effective, this makes him a little bit less approachable, which is harder for newer or casual players to pick up. Additionally, he's a pretty tall and large legend, making him a slightly easier target, and pro players and experienced players understand this. I actually think the introduction of Stormpoint is another semi-nerf to Rev, as many of the buildings on Stormpoint are anti-climb, and the spread out nature of the map means way less totem pushing, as there isn't quite as many ways to do it. But all in all, Revenant is honestly still a blast to play who absolutely has an underrated passive ability, as the flanking capabilities of Revenant are top tier. Since Apex generally has pretty poor, if not terrible audio, this passive gives him some sense of stealth when it does come to approaches as well. The biggest thing Revenant could potentially use is some sort of buff to the totem, where it has increased usability when you are just a sole person attaching to the totem. I don't foresee any change to the totem though, and if anything, I'd personally rather have it stay the way it is than to catapult him way into toxicity again. So what do you think of Revenant? Let me know your thoughts on him in the comments, and if we should take a quick look at any of the other legends in Apex. Apex has had quite a few ups and downs when it does come to a lot of their legends, and sometimes it takes a look into the past to understand how we got where we are today. And it will also help us better predict what is to come. As always, hit that like button if you enjoyed the video, it helps a ton, and hop into the community Discord if you want to chat with myself in the community or to find other players to play with. Till next time, everyone, happy gaming, legends.